Hey, Shayna, Daniel, great to see you guys. I guess today we'll talk a little bit about force plates. They seem to be all the rage. Everyone needs a force plate. Everyone wants a force plate. We've seen them in all kinds of settings, in physical therapy clinics, in performance places, especially in sports teams at the professional and collegiate levels. I think that's where they initially found their home, and they're now percolating downwards to the average consumer, in this case, usually a healthcare provider or a performance coach at a performance center. So there's a lot of force plates out there, it seems like. I think it was started by the bellwether of Bald and Hawken Dynamics. I think they are the two companies that essentially are the big gorillas in the industry that started it. And then we have a few more entrants, I guess, in the marketplace from Europe. I think there's Malok is one of them, and there's one called Kinduct. I think there's probably a few more out there that we're probably even unaware of. But could you give us kind of a perspective on the landscape of what's the big difference in these kinds of technologies? What should physical therapists start to evaluate when they look at these options out there?
Yeah, I think there's a few key main differences between all the force plates that are being produced. I think one is in structure of how you acquire and pay for the force plates. So
Mhm.
some models are subscription based versus some you just buy the force plates and you own them as a clinic. And then on top of that, there's things like sizing of force plates. So let's say your clinic just wants to do isometric testing with force plates. You don't necessarily need the bigger, expensive ones, but if you were doing jump tests, you might want the larger ones to help patients land back on them when they're coming off of a jump. And then even on top of that, just data structure is different for all of these companies. So some companies that are more on the cheaper side do a little less on the data processing and reporting with the data that you get from force plates versus like the more expensive ones come with a whole software system where you can track by patient, and they have better reporting systems where you can track your patient's data over time. So it's just about laying out all of your options and deciding what makes most sense for you as a clinic. If you don't have someone in your clinic that's great with Excel and great with making graphs or reports, then maybe that's a huge decision factor in which one you're going to get. So I think it's just important to do your research, important to use your community and ask other physical therapists like what they're using, what they like versus dislike about it, and then go from there.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there are a couple of different options. One is to get a subscription model that could last probably 2 or 3 years, and there are other options to simply buy force plates outright. And then the other big difference is the quality of the data coming out. I'm assuming that the cheaper force plate is, the less eloquent the data is, or less formatted it is, and perhaps the higher up you go in the value chain, you can get a subscription based model that also does a lot of the data analysis for you and provides outputs that are much more user friendly. Is that kind of a decent summary of your thought process, Shayna?
Yeah, definitely.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I think that's the lay of the land. And Daniel, just so that you have a chance to pike in here as well, I think you've been in the physical therapy clinic for a number of years, both in a research side as well as on the practicing side. You've probably seen a lot of force plates. I'm assuming most of your experience has probably been towards the higher end force plates that provide really great data. Or have you also experienced the other lower tiered versions as well, Daniel?
I've mostly experienced the higher end kind of side of things. I've certainly done some analysis of some of the cheaper ones or some of the ones that you can buy outright, but don't have as much personal experience. Like Shayna said, the most important kind of factor for us in the PT clinic was usability and what the outputs are going to give us. And even on the higher end side of the subscription based model ones like Vault, the ones that we use, they have a pretty decent software side of things. But we're also, create different spreadsheets and different stuff with Excel that we've done in our clinic to really track the metrics that we care about in our own patients and for our own personal patient populations that we care about. So there's also an additional layer that we do just in Excel currently to really hone that even further.
Gotcha. Daniel, you've spent a lot of time doing return to play metrics and you've honed in kind of the art and the science of how to use the data. And it seems you've hyper personalized the output for your clients and for your clinic especially.
Yeah, definitely. It has taken me a couple years to kind of figure that out. I got to the clinic and we had the Evolved Force Decks, and I was super excited about it. But it probably took me 2 to 3 years to really figure out exactly what metrics were meaningful for my patients. And not only just what were meaningful, but what were usable. And I think we talked about that on our last podcast of, you can capture all these metrics, anything you want under the sun. But really, we had to figure out for an ACL population that we were seeing predominantly, which, top three metrics we might need in counter movement jumps, in drop jumps, and those kinds of things, and really narrow it down to just a few. Shayna made a really good point about size too. We had another clinic who was trying to get one of our other locations was trying to get force plates, and they realistically were like, "Hey, we're not going to see as many of the ACL population and do the drop jumps and all these kinds of jump testing. We mostly just want to do it early post-op with squatting and weight shifting and maybe some isometric tests." So they ended up getting the Vald Mini, I believe. It was a little cheaper bit for them, whereas we got the bigger Vald ones because we are doing that the jump testing, and we found that it's really not realistic to jump and land on the mini ones, or you might have somebody like sprain an ankle or something on them because they are elevated off the ground. So a lot of logistics go into the decisions. That's not all scientific. It's just what's feasible in the clinic.
For sure. Shayna, you've been on the data side of all this. You've seen all the outputs coming out. How are you seeing physical therapists using this data? How would you coach them, even in the thought process of using all this incredibly complex data? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I would say a good start for physical therapists who haven't used data a lot would be just think of what am I looking for when I'm asking them to do this task? And then how are the force plates measuring that? And then using that metric and tracking that over time. So, for an example, we'll talk about just a simple squat. What am I looking for? I'm looking for I mean, I don't know if you can see this as well as the force plates can, but I'm looking for asymmetry. So are they leaning more towards one side than the other? I'm also looking at squat depth. So how deep are they going and what's their knee angle at the bottom of the squat? And then to me, that would be a key. Okay, let me look through the metrics that comes out of a squat test on the force plate and see what sort of matches up with that. So asymmetry, force asymmetry between each limb, and I think some systems actually calculate a squat depth for you. So that's what I would say is a good place to start. I think beyond that, there's a lot of materials out there that are free even. There's a lot of like online courses. A lot of these force plate companies offer consulting services, depending on which one you go with, which might also be another key factor of you purchasing them.
Got it. It sounds like there's different levels of assistance that a force plate company could give you, and Daniel has been through it for a while, and it seems like even despite all the help, he has still needed to sort of craft his own specific sauce. Daniel, do you see, and Prashant as well, do you see the physical therapist in the future basically doing what professional teams do, which is they take all this data and they all create their own with their own secret sauces with that data, what it means, because it's not really a science yet. There's still an art to it. It sounds like, despite all this data. So, having said that, Daniel or Shayna, do you foresee the need or the evolution of this into physical therapists having their own secret sauce and how they deploy and how they both gather the data and then deploy it for the patients?
Yeah, I totally think so. In particular, I said it's been a learning process for me to learn this in the last couple years. And I'm still always learning the art of it. And we talk about this all the time in physical therapy that we want to be as scientific as possible, particularly people like Shayna and I, and try to get all the metrics right and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the art of it and the person in front of you is almost always more important. And using your data to really reflect the person in front of you. So Shayna used an example with a squat, and I only recently started looking. I was just looking at those asymmetries and right to left on maybe eccentric force and concentric force. And then I started looking at the depth of the squat, or someone was really trying to say, well, I need to start squatting quickly or squatting deep, or depends what we're working on for the individual in front of us. And then if I look at a velocity, and as soon as our asymmetries are clean, now we look at the eccentric velocity or something like that if we're working towards deceleration, and really honing it to that person in front of you is always going to be way more important. I think we do that on an individual basis, and the better I get to know the force plates and realize that there's more metrics that I can use, the better I am at kind of personalizing it like that. And then for clinics, we see a lot that are kind of specializing in personalizing their metrics around a certain sport, say. There'll be a clinic that we work with that uses a lot of baseball athletes. And yeah, they're still squatting and jumping and that kind of stuff, but they might be all into the isometric upper extremity testing, or really honing it in on that based on their patient population. So that's going to be huge for them to be able to personalize what it can give them.
Gotcha. Shayna?
Yeah, I would just to piggyback off of what Daniel was saying, I think that understanding the environment and who you're working with is way more important than the data. I would say there's a lot of key metrics that a lot of people are using out there, but the metrics you use can change based off of how you're queuing the test. So if I say push into this as fast as you can, or if I just say push into this as hard as you can, like those are two completely different things and can really change the data that you're getting in the output. So I would say just workflow in general can significantly change what kind of metrics you're using out of a test. And then also definitely the person in front of you is the most important thing. Making sure you're um, making sure you're making it relevant to them and what their goals are.
Interesting. I'm just curious, do most physical therapists coming out of school right now, are they taught how to use data? Or is this something they have to learn while they're actually practicing physical therapy or sports medicine?
In a way, yes. I'll speak on. I don't know how every program out there does this, but I'll speak to USC's physical therapy program. And I think they teach, and I think they do a really good job of this that I did not realize I was getting taught this in school. But I think they teach you how to think, and I think they teach you how to clinically reason, without teaching you, oh, it's XYZ method. We're going to teach you this Gary Gray method or this. I don't want to go into all the methods because there can be a million of them. And they teach you aspects of that, but they don't name it. So you don't get stuck in like, oh, I'm going to learn this playbook. They teach you how to clinically reason. And in order to how to clinically reason effectively, you need good data. And it's going back to my very first clinical instructor, Ethan Waldman. I want to give a shout out if he ever sees this. He was my 2 week clinical instructor. So I barely was just a taste of the clinic, but the very first thing he taught me was to come up with what he called an objective asterisk sign. So you have something objective that you can measure that's important to that person, and then you measure that, you do some treatments, and then you remeasure that, and to see that you're actually getting better. You're not just guessing, you can actually test it. And we're taught that kind of methodology in very basic ways when I was in school, in range of motion and strength. But beyond that, when you get into the clinic and you start practicing, people kind of forget how to do that. And we start getting a lot more subjective, in my opinion. And I do this all the time just because I've run out of time with a patient in front of me. And, we fall back on manual muscle testing or things that are not as objective. And then it becomes really hard to track of like, well, are they actually getting better? So I think the thought process is taught, but then the actual data that you're getting needs to still be very objective. It needs to go beyond a manual muscle test or some of our special testing that doesn't have great sensitivity or specificity behind it. The thought process is there, but we need to be better with the actual data, which is where someone like Shayna has spent her teaching and learning and stuff.
Sure. I mean, you come from a data science program at USC, and so I'm sure they probably spend a lot more time helping you understand the data side of what a force plate does. I'm guessing, right, Shayna?
Yeah, I would say most of our time is spent learning what's out there and not even what's out there, but like how is it working and how's it evolved from a lab space to a commercial space. And then what metrics are you using? How are you making a program based off of what the data is telling you? How to make data visualization really easy, and really specific to whoever you're working with. Those are the main things um, they taught us in my program.
Which I'm jealous
Interesting. Well,
of
there's
because we did. Sorry to interrupt. Like we had to learn so much just in physical therapy about that, but I'm jealous that you got all the like hard data stuff because we got out and we got the thought process, but then we're like, but what do we do with this sometimes? And that's
Mhm.
where, I had to teach myself some force plate stuff, or I had to more importantly call you and be like, hey, what am I doing here? This constant learning process. So I'm jealous.
Well, I think that's the beauty of Kaiwan is that we have, both sides of it, from the physical therapy, the data science side, to really help practitioners understand what data they need, what tools they need. There's a lot more to be broken down in terms of force plates and other technologies, and we'll get into that in the next few podcasts. Thanks again for your time, guys.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.